N.K. Dewan, a question for Dr. Zakaria. I was very interested when you specified the four countries, Turkey, India, Russia, and Israel, as being in the forefront of this battle against terrorism. This suggests that the dialogue that the United States has been having with the Arab states needs to undergo some very radical transformation, because to my mind, the problems emanate from within the Arab world and the dealing with highly repressive regimes. How do you feel that India ought to react with the new alliance to Israel, given its preponderance with the Arab world?
Thank you very much. Farid.
Sure, it's a very, very good and difficult question. First, I do believe that the problem here lies within the Arab world. That this is not a phenomenon, as people often talk about, of the Islamic world. 25 years ago, you did not have this problem in Indonesia and Malaysia, Philippines, South Asia. The problem of Wahhabism, political extremism, and international terrorism emanating out of an ideology. This is a product of political repression and a conscious decision to buy cheap legitimacy on the part of the Saudi Arabian government and elites. The United States is going to have to try to have a new relationship with particularly Saudi Arabia and Egypt. This is not an easy problem, as I think any of you know. In the case of Saudi Arabia, the United States does not have an enormous amount of leverage, despite what many think. We do not give Saudi Arabia foreign aid, obviously. And it is also, in many ways, on oil, a very moderate state. This is the paradox of both Saudi Arabia and Egypt. They are regarded as moderate because in some elements of their policies, external policies, they are moderate. But they breed extremism. And so how do you grapple with a problem like that? I think it has to be a large, many-front battle, cultural, ideological, as well as political, of pressuring these countries, battling this kind of radical Islam. But I hope it will be taken seriously, which is, we all recognize that when regions of the world, when populations are denied any political and economic opportunities, you breed political extremism and violence. That is true in the Arab world. It is also true in Kashmir.
Venu Srinivasan. Sir, I'd like to address this to Mr. Naresh Chandra. We have a problem today in eastern Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, where you have Naxalism, which is an internal terrorism problem, which is really arising out of a socio-economic problem. And unless we are going to come back to, I think, what Mr. Zakaria said, become an economic power is necessary even to create stability and prosperity at home. And in the process of liberalization, everybody is focusing on disinvestment, but if you go down to the state level, I think nothing has really changed between the pollution control boards and the factories acts and the labor inspectors and factories inspectors. The license charge hasn't changed one whit. The revenue department, land usage laws for an industry which has already acquired land. And if there is
Mr. Srinivasan, I think we need to.
Okay, so if you're not going to deal with that, how are you going to deal with the problems internally, leave alone becoming a global power?
I agree with you that, and that is why I devoted most of my tasks to dealing with the matters internally. And Dr. Zakaria had put the larger international picture. Now here I would like to tell you one thing, that if you wait for everything to be reformed, then I don't think that day is ever going to come. Now, if you have special measures and you are dealing with unrest or you are dealing with terrorist violence, it's like a fire in the house or fire next door. You have to attend to it. It does not mean that you do not address issues pertaining to social injustice, alienation of people from the system, and also good governance. But good governance by itself is not the answer. If you see in the Indian situation, you find that some of the most backward, illiterate, and distressed areas have been peaceful. And some of the very prosperous and economically well-off people have indulged in terrorist violence. It's a very mixed picture. I also said that the only redeeming feature out of terrorist violence is it forces you to think and act faster and in concert and as a team.
You made certain points. I have very brief 4 points. It's fashionable to be critical of Jawaharlal Nehru. But let me put it to you, or rather ask for your answer. Had he not laid down the economic infrastructural strength of India, mind you, he went away in 1964. He should not be blamed for what has happened later. So, is it an inherent weakness of the Indian system after he went away to adjust to new realities, or was it Nehru, in your judgment? Secondly, you said there are two highways to political power, the political and the economic sort of approach. Are they mutually exclusive? Basic economic decisions are a function of politics. So this compartmentalization, I don't think, is acceptable in terms of the historical evolution all over the world. The third point which you made is that India has a tendency to be insular. I think it is a rather America-centric comment. Are you trying to tell this audience that for the last 50 years, barring the last 2 years, India was walking a path alone without any contacts with the rest of the world? If you had said that India made a policy mistake or a mistake of judgment in not developing an equation with America, I would have accepted it. But to sort of give a value judgment that India is intrinsically insular and being a civilization unto itself, it doesn't have sufficient imagination to march with the world, is a wrong political thing in my judgment. And the last is, the last point which I wish to make, is the struggle against terrorism. You talked about the new paradigm shift, the emergence of a global coalition against terrorism. Apparently it is so, but in substance, is the struggle against global terrorism in all its dimensions, in all parts of the world, or is it a struggle against terrorism of a particular category directed at certain powers? I'd like to know. Thank you.
Sure, all very good points. Nehru is a hero of mine, so I did not mean disrespect. I think he built political democracy in a large third world country, and I think that is, in a way, a unique achievement in modern history. But I have to say, I believe that while he learned many great things from his great liberal Fabian education in England, he also, alas, learned Labour Party economics circa 1945. I do not believe that building the infrastructure of this country, if that's what you claim he did, was the path to success. I believe that fundamentally the Indian government for the last 50 years has spent vast amounts of money on the wrong things, dams, failing steel plants, other public sector companies, and too little money on what is necessary, which is investment in human capital, health and education. If you look at the East Asian miracle, that is the single lesson that dominates all others, that governments that were able to invest in human capital and hook up with the world economy were able to succeed. On your second point, politics and economics, the point I was making was simply that the political path to power is temporary, the economic path to power is permanent. Of course, you need both, and I think that was the substance of my talk about the change in the nature of globalization, where we now realize that globalization has a political dimension. On whether India has tended to be insular or not, I leave it to the audience to decide, but it strikes me as a country that has been deeply suspicious of free trade, deeply suspicious of involving itself, engaging with the international community, been suspicious of the Western powers. Yes, there was a brief flirtation with the Soviet Union, which I suppose one could call an engagement of a sort, but I think by and large there has been a tendency. I say this not to suggest that India is unique in this respect. Large continental nations that are civilizations unto themselves tend to be insular. I happen to live in another large continental nation that tends to be insular. And one of the great struggles in America has been to get America to engage with the world. So I think it takes one to know one. Finally, on terrorism, You raise a very good point. The war against terrorism is not going to be a global war against terrorism, because that is simply too abstract a term and subject to massaging and manipulation. There will be one man's terrorist can be another man's freedom fighter. And there will be variations, and countries will be more concerned with terrorism that affects them. As India is more concerned about terrorism that affects it, naturally the United States is going to be more concerned about terrorism that is directed toward it. However, I do believe there has been a dramatic shift in the international climate, in that the tolerance for the use of violence and terror, particularly against unarmed civilians, has gone way, way down. And I think in that sense, the major powers, who are all threatened by that kind of violence because they represent order and stability and contain within them many subnational forces and groups, will all be allied in a common way. It will not always seem like seamless and perfect unity, but it's a lot better than what we had 5 years ago.
Thank you very much. We're going to take the last question, and to get the gender balance right, we go to Jyoti Malhotra, right at the back.
Thank you. I'm with the Indian Express, and this question is to Mr. Zakaria. You spoke, Mr. Zakaria, of the fact that today is a historic moment today, and how India must grasp the opportunity offered by the West. Nevertheless, in comments to questions, you reveal, it seems to me, an obsession with Kashmir. Why has Kashmir become, to the West, this litmus test of democracy for India? We have been a democratic nation, I think, for many years. And why is it that, you talk of the denial of freedom in Kashmir? It's been true, I'm sure, and I think we accept it ourselves. But also, when, the ethnic cleansing and the conditions of partition.
I think you need to wind it up, please.
Yes, thank you. The destruction of the Jaffna Library, and I'm asking whether the West would you like with India to create many more libraries all over India, not only in Kashmir? So would the West be willing to help India in sort of moving forward?
Let me begin by pointing out that we've now been speaking for almost 1 hour. I think I made about a 3-line reference to Kashmir in the talk. If that reveals an obsession with Kashmir, you should listen to my real obsessions. Let me put it this way. There is no way to speak about Kashmir in a balanced way without annoying somebody. I believe that Pakistan has made India's Kashmir policy very easy for the last 15 years, intellectually. Because by supporting cross-border terrorism, by engaging in extraordinarily pernicious policy, it made India's response obvious. India had to respond. It had to respond militarily. It had to respond in a very tough way. It had to be unyielding. However, all political extremism and violence in Kashmir does not emanate because of cross-border terrorism and Pakistani support. Some of it emanates from the fact that Kashmiris have been denied political and economic opportunities for a long time. And it's not 10 years. I think that if Pakistan were to stop its pernicious policies, India faces a quandary. What is then its Kashmir policy? The Kashmir policy vis-a-vis Pakistan is very simple, and I agree with it. But what is India's policy toward Kashmir if that constraint were removed? And I just hope there will be some creative thinking about how to create a situation where India can be proud of democracy all over the country and not have to make this exception.